Hello all, and welcome back to another episode of In Plain Sight. So in our last episode, we explored the fact that we have an energy body, an aura, a bioenergetic field, this part of us that emanates from our physical body, that's attached to higher densities or dimensions, higher aspects of ourselves that tap into a higher reality. That's what we explored, and we explored the ins and outs of this connection and how it works and the intricacies of it. So in this video, we are really going to go deeper into what happens exactly when somebody's energetic field is really rooted in a human consciousness that's full of fear and pain and trauma. Because it does cause a distinct difference in how the bioenergetic field functions. So one way to look at our bioenergetic field, the bioenergetic field of the earth human, the human being, is that it has 7 major energy centers. And each energy center, going from red, which is the very dense physical spectrum, to sort of a higher purpley crown chakra spectrum, violet. All of these different chakras here provide a different perspective of reality. They provide almost like a different part of ourselves that we can tune into to get information, because everyone is sort of feeding us information. So we actually have this very complex way that we perceive and interact with the world through these energy centers. So we're really designed with our 7 chakra system to integrate and use all of these 7 perspectives, all of these 7 chakras. So when you are in your progressive sort of enlightenment journey, where you are letting love and everything, it's a little bit cliche, but there really isn't any other word or language to describe it. When you're letting that higher consciousness guide you, that we feel and we understand as love, then we're really moving towards the integration of these 7 energy centers to the point that an entirely different and more advanced energy body awakens. You know, we move up. That's what ascension is. If you're allowing your fear to settle into your body and you're not taking risks in the direction of your heart, you're not listening to your spirit, you're listening to your fear, and you're getting darker and darker and darker, what ends up happening is that out of your 7 chakras, you really only start to tune into about 3. Now, it's the bottom 3. Okay, so you've got your red, orange, and your yellow. Okay, those are the 3 that become dominant when you're only really feeling fear the majority of the time. The heart center, and this is why everybody talks about the heart, is, for us, it's the smack dab center of our energy body. And in that way, it is our point of balance. It's where the mind is balanced by emotion, the emotion is balanced by mind, and it becomes a complete harmonizing force in our life. It is the balancing force of the instinct, feeling, and the mind of the lower three. And then as we move up, we're introduced to even higher spectrums of energy and self-expression up from the heart. These are more higher energy centers. And these energy centers really do require, in order to work properly, they really do require this relationship with the heart, with the center of our being. And that's kind of also where we sometimes get that figure 8, the infinity symbol, is our body really harmonizes through this kind of transponder of the heart. So it takes the higher energy and it steps it down into more of a physical form so that we can use it. And then it also takes any lower energies and kind of pushes them back up. We're in constant communication. So the heart is really, really, really important. And it's important that it stays open. But when we remain in fear and we start to believe that, we're not worthy of love, we're not worthy of a good life, and when we start to feel a lot of depression and anxiety, and we don't have an aspect of ourselves that, like a fire that clicks on, that starts to do different things to challenge that or to work with that energy, and it becomes, we only believe in that, the heart actually begins to close down, because the heart doesn't know that language. The heart doesn't understand like that you're not God. The heart doesn't understand that you're not a holy part of God. You're not a holy presence on this earth, that you're not worthy. Like it doesn't resonate with it. So you cut yourself off from your heart chakra, which means you cut yourself off from really the higher, more pure densities of reality. And you start functioning in this really low system of, very dense system of thought and emotion and even spirituality. And when people say mark of the beast and kind of like beast nature, what they're referring to is when our bioenergetic field, our chakra centers, when they flip into this reversal, where the lower part is completely dominant and the upper part cannot be felt. And here's the other thing, this is why it happens as well, is that your spirit, your soul, is always going to push you to realize what's dark about yourself and bring it to the light. It's always going to say, look in the mirror so that you can realize that you are more than what you think you are. It's always going to push, it's always going to want to detoxify you of your own pain. And that's a really hard process. That's a really, really hard thing to go through when you're already hurting, to be exposed to light, to be exposed to love energies can actually be very, people don't talk about that very often, but like if you haven't seen the sun in like months and then you go outside and there's even a little bit of sunlight, like it's what you need. Without it you're gonna die, but it's painful. And so in order to avoid the glare of their own spirit, the glare of their own truth, they've convinced themselves of such dark things that it's like they hide in the lower 3 chakras. But what happens is the consciousness degrades, because we have this higher energy body, this higher aspect of our energy body for a reason. It is to magnetize us back up into the higher worlds. It is to, when we move into a ascension cycle, which we're in now, it is so that we can move up and away from the descending energies that pull us down. We need that higher energy system to recover us, to pull us into our higher nature, to help us recover our intuition and our lost levels of consciousness. We need those higher energy bodies, those higher chakras. We need the magnetism of those higher centers to act as like a vacuum that pulls us upwards. So if you shut down your heart and you go into that really dark place, you're denying yourself of that, and you're actually going to become denser. And that is the description of the mark of the beast, because when you only exist within this very dense form, it's like an animal. You are basically only living within an animalized nature of yourself. And this is no disrespect to animals. Animals are lovely, but it's more of a lower level of consciousness. Like an animal can't make pancakes, or, you know, that's good or bad, but there's a different level of consciousness between these things. And this is the human animal nature, which actually is, it can be violent, it can be destructive, but it doesn't have the ability to develop a type of human consciousness that is necessary for this form to exist, which is to create sort of more compassion-based connections, more intelligent, compassion-based connections, spiritual connections. We're designed to be spiritual, highly spiritual beings. And so when we revert, it's really not pretty. It's really not pretty. So in a lot of ways, this beast-like nature, it represents a regressive nature, a reverting backwards. And human consciousness starts to, you know, a lot of people say that the mark of the beast is like the microchip and AI going into the body. And that's something to really consider, because at the end of the day, even when you're in this regressive state, this animalistic state, rather than, you know, thinking of everybody as interlinked spiritually, and one spiritually, you're kind of just all for yourself, and who cares about anybody else. When humans become regressive in a more animalistic sense, they become all for themselves. Selfish, narcissistic, they become survivalists, and they no longer function as a community and as a group. They always try to dominate the group. It's about dominance and taking over, and everything's out of fear. They think something negative is always going to happen. It's going back into this animalistic survival state, and they're unable to kind of live in a civilized way. They're too traumatized and too focused on survival, and something bad's around the corner. They're too much echoing in this pain. The heart chakra is not open to give them hope, to give them the way out. They've refused it. So it's a really sad state. But even when you're in that state, even when you're in this state of regression, you still crave to move on to the next phase. You're just completely deluded and limited in your functioning. So what this means is that, you know, instead of just regaining your cosmic memory, instead of just regaining your intuitive abilities, your ability to remember past lives, your ability to download information from the Akashic records, have a cosmic mind, rather than actually just regain something that's organic, as the ascension cycle does for us, you're going to instead like insert it as a microchip, or you're gonna just like connect your mind to a computer. This is that externalized, you know, materialist scientism that basically thinks that everything's external. Like they don't even comprehend the spiritual world. Why? Because they're functioning in a 3 chakra system. They don't even have the level of their energy body awake, aware, invested in, and open to comprehend spirit in an advanced way. It's only the very lowest aspect of the spiritual world that they can even perceive, which from our 3rd dimensional place is technically an invisible realm, but it is not an exalted realm. It's not a realm of great power. It's a parasitic realm. And so we're going to get into that now. So the thing that happens when humans revert in their energy into this beast, regressive nature is that they become parasitic. They become vampires. They become predatory by nature. They become predatory predators. Why? Why do they become this way? Because they can't get chi anymore. They can't actually get energy. They've atrophied by their choice. So when your system has basically flipped into this parasitic form, you really can't get energy in any other way. When you are now 3 chakra dominant and you've reverted your energy, you've cut yourself off from spirit, okay, by your own choice. And a lot of people, you know, they feel like, oh, you know, or, you know, they're just kind of like lost puppy dogs, or, you know, you just have so much sympathy for people like this. It's almost like it's not their fault. But the thing that I want to really nail home here is that we all have free will. So you have chosen in your life every point of ascension that you've experienced, every time when you've overcome something, any time where you've become the alchemist and transformed something, you did that. You did that through your free will. You earned that. Just like on the flip side, when you hid from yourself, when you hid from your light and you maybe degraded a little bit, you did that too. And so in order to recognize our light in this world and our achievements and our journey, to authentically recognize our journey, we have to recognize the fact that every single one of us has free will. And if somebody is in that state where they are predators and they are exploitive people, they didn't just get there because they had, you know, no choices. They got there through the same means that you're getting everywhere in your life, through free will. You can't just take everybody who has, who's in a dark place and assume that they've gotten there because of, you know, somebody doing something to them. It's not their choice. We have to acknowledge that we live in a free world, in a free will life form. We live in a free will form. And so we have to know that that feeds and defines our accomplishments, but also our failures. And so a lot of these people have chose life after life to degrade, and that is on them, okay? So what ends up happening is the heart chakra is blocked, and it's the transponder. It is the part of us that takes that higher energy, steps it down to be interpreted and used, and so our physical body can be nourished by it. Like, we just can't pull in higher information as it is. It has to be stepped down in density so we can digest it. These higher chakras is like a digestion process. And the heart chakra is really what makes it something that we can, our mind and emotional body can latch onto, right? That's why we have it. And so when you cut yourself off from that, you cut yourself off from your food. You cut yourself off from your spiritual food, your chi, your prana, your ki. You say, I don't need that. But the problem is you do. And so that is why they become parasitic, they become vampires, zombies. All that mythology is talking about this exact process. It is stories to reveal and communicate a very intense esoteric process of regression and how our consciousness functions once we've regressed into that beast form, that lower form. We become parasitic beings. And once you do that, you want to set up structures in the world where you can secure energy to harvest. And this gets into a lot of conspiracy theories about why certain things are done and why there's all these circles of power. Well, if your very life and your consciousness depended on you being able to parasitically suck energy from people because you can't do it yourself, the first thing you're going to do in that crazy fearful state is you're going to try to get a stranglehold on as much energy as you possibly can so that you can suck it dry. Period. You'll want to secure your resource. It's the same reason why we started doing agriculture, is that we wanted to, you know, secure food resources, becoming an agricultural society, secured food. It's the same thing, except they're eating energy from people. We all, if you are a succinct force in your life, you will work towards getting your prana, your chi, your ki only from your closed system within yourself, from nature, from within your own being, in clean ways. You have a healthy system of exchange with the cosmos. But this is something totally different. They're unable to get energy from themselves and from their heart and from the cosmos itself. They've cut themselves off, so they need to get it in other ways. They want to secure, and that's where a lot of this nefarious stuff comes from. And then in regards to the occult, all of this stuff starts becoming literal in rituals. And we're gonna, don't you worry, we're gonna get right into that in this season. But the last thing that I wanted to talk about here is actually the dimensional reach. So when, obviously, if you're cut off at the heart chakra and you're only pulling in the lower three, you're only functioning, and the first sign of falling into your beast nature, of this happening, this regression happening, is when you start thinking that the emotional body is garbage. When you start to think that the emotional body especially is just something that should be done away with, and that the mind is better. It is that splitting of the mind and emotion that begins the beast nature. Because in the heart, the mind and the mental body and the emotional body are harmonized into one force that is called human balance. It allows the flow of the higher chakra system to come through. Though when the mind and when the mental body and the emotional body separate, what ends up happening is breaks the heart into two, and that can't get through very well, or if at all. So that has a really, really, really big effect. Sometimes it happens in the opposite end too, when people become like just too emotional and never even use their mind. But in our day and age, with our obsession with science and everything, scientism, materialist stuff, it's more the other one. But in a matriarchy, the other thing would be, in a matriarchal cycle, in a female cycle, it would be the other thing. It would be cutting ourselves off from the mind, something like that. But anyway, it splits the center, and you can't get that energy in. It doesn't work for you. It's kind of like trying to start a car and it won't start. And this has a huge effect on our psychic reach. The portal for proper psychic work is the heart. Most intuition developments that are good will talk about healing in them. And they'll emphasize that, you know, when you heal yourself, your intuition returns. That is no joke. That is no joke. But what ends up happening with individuals that try to do occult practice when they're in that beast nature, that beast system, that lower chakra mindset, 3 chakra mindset, what ends up happening is they can't actually reach higher dimensions at all. Their consciousness completely locks into the lower astral realm. This is the lowest possible dimension and density within that dimension that you could possibly be in. It's just basically like, it's a chaos realm. But because it's actually less dense than 3D, people think it's this exalted spiritual place. You know, it's kind of like eating fast food versus eating something that's really nutrient dense. It's like, you know, it's not the reality. So that's what happens when the body inverts. When the energy body begins inverting and reversing like that, it can only tap into the very lowest level of psychic reality. It's like the hell realms, the purgatory realms, and they begin to think, because their perception is limited, they begin to think like this is the most amazing, these whatever deities and entities exist here, like these are gods, you know, they're a little bit less dense than me, so that must be a god. They must be, you know, they start to kind of deify these beings that are basically like fallen, trapped in this chaos realm. And so you can see how this has a very negative and dark esoteric counterpoint, where it's almost like you've chopped yourself off in the bottom, in the garbage realms, basically. And so this is where it starts getting into all this black magic stuff and dark ritual stuff. But hey, if you talk to these people, and I've talked to people who are on this path, they will tell you, like, you know, yeah, so, you know, God and the devil are equal. You know, they function here in the same capacity. It's like, yeah, if all you can perceive is the lowest part of 4D, the lower astral realm, like if all you're perceiving is the lowest part of psychic consciousness, then that's going to be your opinion. But beyond that, you'll see everyone that you're trying to connect with are fallen, lost beings. Because beyond that, there is a trumping, more high force where this kind of polarity doesn't even exist, which is just the cosmos itself. And this is just the embodiment of a destructive force. So when you get into this mindset, they really have a very small, everything is all about only this little tiny way of thinking and being, and they can't really perceive dynamics or energy from higher realms. They can't understand that there is a more powerful light, a more powerful energy, especially in like a descension cycle or a dark cycle, a Kali Yuga on the planet, when that higher defining light kind of fades away. They really start to believe that, because this higher aspect is really, it's a test, but it's not sensed as much. And so people really do begin to believe that. But hey, they start to think that that's the whole system. So, but they're limited. And what ends up happening, of course, is the personality starts to change, and you start to repeat your trauma cyclically all the time. You become a victimizer, usually, or a victim. You're really trapped in that paradigm. And you'll also get stuck in codependent relationships, because again, you're not able to tap into the heart, flip it over, and get information from source, from your higher self, from God. You're not able to function independently. Without your heart chakra, you're not able to function independently as a spiritual being. You have to operate parasitically. So the lower aspect of these realms, the lower realms, they're all about creating these codependent false hierarchies that are all about exploiting Earth, that are all about exploiting 3D. That's why Earth is the hardest planet to, like 3D is the hardest dimension to navigate, because it's like there is another, density above you that is, for all intents and purposes, invisible, that appear godlike. And so this is also where you get into a lot of false gods, which I'm going to get into in this series very deeply. These shadow beings that will often, and this is where it gets tricky, boys and girls, is that they will often mimic and plagiarize and steal and copy. They will take on the form of deities. They will steal information that's already saturated in human consciousness and bring it forward. They can't create anything, but they'll mimic right? And that's where people get really confused, is that they think that they're communicating with these certain beings, but it's a mimicry. It's a false light. They're false beings. They're not even real. And people get real sucked into that. And so there's a false hierarchy that's all based in the desire to enslave and exploit and to seek externally through stealing and manipulation what they cannot create internally. And that's the whole dynamic. If you were to remember anything about the false light and false gods, it's all about that. It's also death-oriented, or as my friend Olivia loves to say, it's a death cult, or it's death-oriented, or it's destructive-oriented. It's self-destructive, and it's to the point where they're so lost that it's just, they just become the embodiment of destruction. And this is where we have satanic like beings, demons, all the dark stuff. And over time, people get if you stay in that energy, you get denser and denser and denser, and you just tether more of your soul, more and more and more, into that level of reality. So, in other words, when you saturate yourself in fear, your entire consciousness changes. It becomes completely different from somebody who is on a different path. And this is why you will have people who are light workers or people who are spiritually oriented, and they're like, I just don't get why someone would be so destructive. Like, I just don't understand why someone would do that to themselves or do that to somebody else. And you just can't get it. That's because even though we all look like human beings here, if you were to look at their energy body and you were to see where their energy system was plugging in and the kind of beings that are around them, it looks completely different than you. You would run in horror, right? Even though we all coexist here, ladies and gentlemen, we're not all plugging into the same higher realms. And when you are plugging into higher dimensions, you can't even fathom why anyone would function that way. It is inferior. And not even from a place of arrogance inferior, just genuinely inferior, energetically, and everything about it. So at the end of the day, that's why there is this schism in the population, is because fundamentally, energetically, spiritually, cognitively, there are different species here. And I really want to nail that home. This video is probably going to be a little long, but this is really important material, and I really want to make sure that everybody understands it. And of course, as always, we're going to go deeper into this topic on my website where I have forums, and we're going to go even deeper into discussing this. So if you're loving this conversation, do consider supporting me and going on there and continuing this conversation. So what happens is, spiritually and occult wise, you start getting this ceiling of perception where obviously you start thinking that low realms are high realms, and that's why being occult illiterate and spiritually illiterate and trying to divorce yourself from your spirit is really a bad idea, because then you have these people who are practicing dark rituals and creating organizations to lead and control the world, and technically spiritually you're inferior to them. Why? Because they're occupying and using that little bit of spiritual energy they have. And if you refuse to use yours at all, that's dominant. That's influencing you. If you want to leave your spirit as an empty go-kart, as an empty house, as an empty chair, and they're at least filling their chair consciously, that's more powerful. It doesn't matter if you're a good person. I mean, it does, but esoterically, we have to be responsible for our spirit now. We can't hide from it anymore, because the person who can bring, the people who can bring spirit deeply in their body are going to be the ones that have the most influence. And if you're not bringing it in at all, you're not even in the game. Because if they're bringing something, even if it's dark, at least they're bringing it in their body. They're actually creating a certain magnetism where if you're fractured, that actually beats it. And that's why we have such a problem, is because people just completely avoid learning about this. They completely avoid understanding this, thinking that they're being smart or safe, or they're just being superstitious, and they're actually rendering themselves fractured and vulnerable. So, moving on, there's false gods. We talked about that. There's false gods in the lower astral realm, in these lower realms. And sometimes they do appear as like, you know, false Jesus, false Buddha. I mean, false, they mimic, right? That's their power. But the light that is used to create the images of these beings is dimmer. It's dimmer and it's low, and it has a certain dark hum to it that if you saturate yourself in higher light, and if you have a good spiritual practice, you'll recognize the difference, because the light that these beings summon is darker. It's still there. They can still create light. They've stolen it from us. They've stolen it from people, and they create things from it. But it's darker than a higher dimensional being. Sometimes it's so bright. It makes you feel differently too. But if you're not learning about this and educating yourself, you're just gonna think that, there's something there. There's a being. It must be greater than me. We need to grow up and get over that and learn discernment. Okay, so here is also what happens to human consciousness when it starts to really tether into the lower realms. The system is inverted and reversed, can't get in through the heart chakra, can't get higher energy, it's parasitic, they're predatory. Here's a little bit deeper into what the consciousness is like. So usually there's a bit of a courting process in the occult with deities, and this can eventually lead to possession. But usually the first thing that will happen is that these beings will stroke your ego. And they'll often tell you that you're going to become something very important, you're going to be very wealthy, you're very important, you're a very important incarnation, or they'll start to make you feel very, very special. And eventually this feeling of ego stroking specialness makes you feel like you are more of a god and kind of above others than an intricate part of God. We're all an intricate part of God, incarnating from different points of our journey, different levels of awareness, and we're supposed to work together to uplift and grow. But we're all intricate pieces of one God. And what will happen is these beings will court you, they'll make you feel very special, and then they'll tell you that you're basically better. You're on a special mission, you're gonna be famous. And this is to get you to keep connecting with them, because a lot of people don't feel special. A lot of people don't feel connected to their purpose. They don't feel connected to their spirit. They feel kind of useless. Like, we have a real issue with people feeling lost. And so it's easy picking sometimes. And so what they'll do is they'll make you feel special. And so then that's how that relationship kind of starts. And at first it just seems kind of exciting and harmless, but eventually this ego stroking can lead to might is right, where you actually think that you're better than others, that you are the caretakers of this world, and it's your job to do all of the banking and all of the medical stuff, all of the medical decisions and pharmaceutical, like this is all you and your special group because you're better. And this is how they get in, is they play on people's vulnerabilities and their insecurities, and they make you feel that. And then you start getting into might is right. And you're better, so you're gonna rule. But really, I mean, that's might is right. I've gone into that in other videos. This is getting long, so I don't want to go on about that. But they believe also that they, as a human, has the capability of perhaps even playing out the role of the shadow in society, and they're actually doing holy work by hurting others because they're better, right? They're playing this role, so it's actually holy for them to hurt others. And this is justifying their ego. And these beings are just anchoring misguided people into the lower astral and feeding on them basically by getting them to do this. And so that's actually how that courting process begins with dark beings. That's how it begins, and that's how it ends, is you just end up thinking that you're better, might is right, and it's your job to lord over people and be both the bearer of light and shadow, when in reality it is God that does that. Okay? So at the end of the day, these people also, this comes at a great price, and you'd think that people would realize this, but when this starts to happen and you start anchoring into these lower levels of reality and you lose your connection with your heart, is you actually stop being able to be creative. So our spirit is what inspires us. That's where the word in spirit comes from. But what ends up happening is you end up losing all of your creativity because you can't get that higher energy in. So you can't get original ideas. And so as a result, they copy, they plagiarize. Like when you see spiritual teachers basically copying other people's work and data mining and stealing it and then presenting themselves as like spiritual teachers. Yeah, that's an exact, if you're genuinely spiritual, by definition, you should be creative. By definition, you should be full of inspiring, creative stuff. You shouldn't be copying, you shouldn't be plagiarizing, doesn't make any sense. By definition, doesn't make any sense. And also, they'll also lose their magnetism. They'll lose their personal magnetism. So they'll often develop, like that's why Hollywood can be such a dark place, is that these people have kind of lost magnetism and they'll use other people who have magnetism to do things. So usually they have a lot of fronts where they'll use people with a lot of magnetism to do things because they've kind of lost theirs. At that point, they're probably so addicted to energy and their vampirism that they don't even realize that, hey, maybe I should have some more creativity and magnetism, but they don't. The other thing that happens is they lose compassion and they lose empathy. When you go into that survivalist state, you think nobody cares about you or nobody cared about you. You had to go through it. So you lose all empathy and compassion. And empathy and compassion are the qualities of the heart. And they are actually what will unify this world and connect this world and allow us to move into a higher octave on this planet, right? So the other thing that happens is because you don't have this sense for higher worlds anymore, you really focus on the external world, you focus on the material world, you think it's really all there is, you become really obsessed with money, really obsessed with physical pleasures, anything that's really lower here becomes the be-all end-all of your world. Well, yeah, if you can't sense and create a feeling of bliss in your body by walking through a forest or by just training yourself, you're gonna need to do a ton of drugs. You're gonna need to get it externally. You're gonna need to get it through money and luxury and things like that. Like, you need that. You can't get it any other way. So the material world becomes everything, because to them, it's the source of all pleasure. It's the source of all focus. There is nothing else. There can't be. Not with their structure. Okay. So, of course, extreme obsession with the lower chakras, physical pleasure becomes divorced from spiritual. So when you are sexual, when you are experiencing physical pleasure, you want to do it from a place where your whole being is experiencing it from a spiritual place. You want to include all of you. You want it to, that's where the most pleasure is anyway, when it's experienced in a fullness of being, not just a physical sense. That's a low form of it. But you get really obsessed with that in this reality, and that's where the hedonism comes, where you just go for pleasure all the time, never stopping, because that's the only way you can get a little bit of a break from your own sickness, right? And that's why you start getting into all these weird sex cults and the sex being used in such weird ways in the occult, is it's because, yeah, that's the most like closest way that they can bring in some kind of power and light, but even then it's not as charged as it should be. So also, as soon as the body goes into this form and it reverses like this, is that the spiritual practices become extreme. So there either is no spiritual practice, such as the case with like true atheism, or you become hedonistic in your spiritual practice, indulgent, no morals. But both of those approaches leave the individual not to take responsibility, which is a big one. Because in a lot of ways, it's not just fear that brings people here. It's avoiding taking responsibility for who they are. It's the avoiding of taking responsibility for their very presence and identity here, which is also what the heart represents. It represents your blueprint, who you are. And so in a way, when you term this way, it's like you didn't want to take responsibility for your mission. Okay? And so that's why the spiritual practice is both an avoiding spirit, both atheism and even some parts of the New Age and stuff where it's totally hedonistic, like no consideration for moral or discipline or anything like that. That is just avoiding responsibility as well. So I'm going to have to save the rest for another episode, but we'll just end it here. And that is essentially the story of what happens to our personality and our consciousness, our energy body, when we flip into fear-oriented ways of life. When we don't take responsibility for who we are, and we just hide and get smaller and smaller and smaller. That is basically what happens. And so, yeah, let me know in the comment section what you think and if you've encountered anyone that's like this. As always, it has been my absolute pleasure today to speak with you. And as always, all my love your way. And as dark as this information is, we are not alone. And together, we can do this. As always, always, all my love your way. And I